Did Bill Self open up on the truth behind this whole thing with Darryn Peterson? Plus, KU football is having a bit of a transfer frenzy, and it's going the wrong way.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. And thank you for tuning into the show and making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. On today's episode of the show, we're diving into Bill Self's postgame comments from after KU defeated Davidson, in which it finally felt like we got a peek behind the curtain of what is exactly going on with this whole Darryn Peterson saga. So we'll get into a little bit of that. And then we'll finish up with a KU football transfer frenzy as 3 more players have entered the portal from KU football, including, I think most notably would probably be Harry Stewart there. Let's start here with in KU. Here was the quote last night after the game. He was asked about Darryn Peterson. Obviously, he didn't play in the Davidson game or one of the last 2 games. He said, quote, "I think he's doing well. They're going to make a decision. They made a decision, which I don't disagree with at all, that they want him to be as close to 100% as possible when he comes back, and he's just not quite there yet. It's a day-to-day deal. He will be. I wish he could have played tonight, but fact of matter is, guys got some run and did well." And then there was a follow-up question from Henry Greenstein that said, who does he mean by they? Because I go back to that quote. It says, "I think he's doing well. They're going to make a decision. They made a decision," right? So he says, who do you mean by they? Good follow-up question there. And Bill Self says, his family. You know, the thing about it is, we talked about this. We're in agreement with the family that he should not play until he feels good. We're in agreement, but I'm not inside his head or his body that I can determine if he feels good enough or not. That's up to him. He wants to be out there. He's just not quite ready. And let's break this down, because I think there's a lot to break down there too, right? And I would highly recommend going to check out the actual video or the clip. I know Michael Swain posted the full clip of it. I know you can find videos of the press conference like through KU's website or on YouTube and all sorts of places. But there's certain it almost to me, and maybe this is reading between the tea leaves and not exactly where he was trying to go with this, right? But from my reading the situation, it felt a lot like Bill Self was kind of getting to a point where he was finally frustrated enough, right? We've heard so many different things along the way. We've heard sickness, we've heard cramps, we've heard hamstring tight, and it's possible all of those things did happen, but it's just it felt like there was a different thing, and he kept getting asked about it, and it felt like from his perspective, he probably is frustrated by this, right? Honestly, probably a lot of the media frustrated by it too, from the standpoint of that they have to keep asking because they don't like asking and having Bill Self being pissed about it. But that's what people want to know, so they keep asking the question. And again, Bill Self probably doesn't like having to answer the question over and over, but it's what people want to know, so you're going to keep having to answer it, right? And so you get a bit of that frustration that you finally get to this point where you get here and you reveal some of this, and it felt like a lot to me of you saw a lot of the truth here from Bill Self of what is actually happening here, while also him trying to rein it in. You would see oh yeah, this is his family. We're in agreement with the family, but then he'd be like, oh, but I agree with it, right? Trying to both save face with the family and with Darryn Peterson's camp, while also letting out a little bit of frustration. It was a very, I guess, guided response, eloquently towing the line, I thought, by Bill Self to kind of get between the two. And it did feel like a little bit of okay, Bill Self, I'm finally tired of this, and here we're going to go with this, right? So the next question that becomes of this is, was this did he finally share this information because the family told him, hey, we're tired of seeing all this on social media and hearing about people, what's going on and stuff too. Just tell him it's our decision. We want him to be 100%. We're looking out for him. He's our kid, or I don't know if it's agent or what is exactly the part of his family, right? Or is it Bill Self's frustration let that kind of get out? And, then the follow-up to that would be, is Darryn Peterson's family going to be upset? Is Darryn Peterson's family going to be mad about this being out in the open now? Was Bill Self kind of falling on the sword through the first couple months of the season to kind of protect that side of things, right? Because what you don't want to have happen here, there's 2 things you don't want to have happen here. It's you're catching a fish here in a way. where like you don't want to scare the fish away. You know, you're not going to like yell into the water. You're not going to like throw a rock into the water. You want to be calm. You want to have your fishing pole in the water. You want to catch the fish. And the metaphor here is the catching the fish is having Darryn Peterson play for you. But it's not just the fish that you're going for. You're going for that big fish that you can reel in. You're going for that 40-pound salmon on the Kenai. It's not just that. It's that you're going for the next fish too, because you don't want to turn this into a disaster where now future agents or future other coaches recruiting against you or future, players see it and go, hey, potential top 3 pick, number 1 pick, Darryn Peterson, 5-star recruit, came to Kansas, and look at all this drama going on. I'm a 5-star recruit and one of the best players in the country. Do I really want to go there? And then other coaches are using that to recruit against you. So it is this fine line of like you having to play this game a little bit. And so again, does this notion make it more or less likely that he plays? Now that it's out in the open, maybe there's more pressure on Darryn Peterson and his family to get to play. Then again, was this just coming from his family to try to, to be like, hey, with Bill Self, like, take the onus off you, like, we don't care, just put it on us, right? Who knows? I think that's going to be very interesting to find out, but it did feel like we finally got to kind of the truth behind what is exactly going on here, which the truth, to be clear, is not that he's not injured. He is injured. Like, I want to be very clear with that, right? Like, if you watched the last couple games that he played, he did not have the same level of explosiveness. I made the comparison in a previous episode that he looked like the older version of Joe Johnson that was like not the same explosive Joe Johnson. If you remember, former multi-time All-Star in the NBA, he was the end of his career version of him where he could, hit a tough jump shot. He could post up on you. He could do all these things, but he wasn't the same explosiveness. That's what he looked like in the 2 previous games. So there's clearly something bothering him. It's just the level of, is he at the level that Bill Self thinks he should play through it? The family thinks differently, or is this, again, you go off the Bill Self quote, he's in full agreement, but is that just the public side of things? But it did feel like we got a little bit more peek behind the curtain of what is going on with the injury and when that return to be. And that does make things more complicated with if and when he would potentially come back. So I do want to get into our second segment here because this being more of a family decision, to me, it makes it like you're going to handle it with kid gloves a little bit more. For him to come back, he's really going to have to be good to go, right? Like if this was just a coach's decision, I don't know what the threshold is. Let's say the threshold is 80%, 90% of when a coach would clear you, the coach and the doctor would clear you and be like, hey, you're going to have to play through a little bit of pain, but you can do it. Whereas if it's a family's decision, it is going to really be, you have to be 100%, right? And maybe that makes it less likely that we see Peterson soon. Maybe it makes it less likely that we see Peterson at all. I'm not saying that's going to be the case. We could very well see Darryn Peterson for the start of Big 12 play. It just decreases the odds of those things happening. So I want to kind of take a deep dive into how KU has done this season in the games that Darryn Peterson has not played to kind of get an idea, what this team would be if you don't have Darryn Peterson for an extended period of time. This episode of the show is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. The holidays are here, and whether you're hosting family, planning the perfect gift, or just trying to keep things simple and delicious, Omaha Steaks is making it easier than ever. From effortless holiday entertaining to unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience straight to your door. What makes it even better, with Omaha Steaks, you always know exactly what you're gifting. USDA certified tender steaks, premium proteins, gourmet sides, and decadent desserts that make anyone feel appreciated. I've sent Omaha Steaks, or I've actually gotten Omaha Steaks as a gift before. I've loved it as a gift to me. And I don't know, like if I love it as a gift, that doesn't, I don't know. I would be very happy giving it out to somebody else and being like, hey, I really enjoyed this. I would imagine you're going to too, right? As long as, you're sending it off and they're getting it in time to cook those steaks up for their New Year's party or Christmas. I mean, they're going to be pretty happy with it, right? So save big on gourmet gifts, holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com and for an extra $35 off, use code COLLEGE at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That is omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Thanks again for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. So how has KU done this year with and without Peterson on the floor? And obviously you can see KU's ranked 17th this week in the AP poll. They're, I think, 16th at the moment on KenPom. They're actually 11th right now on Bart Torvik. But what if we excluded the time that Darryn Peterson has, not been on the court basically? And if we look at it, obviously that's still limited sample, right? Because you're looking at just over 100 minutes over the course of 4 games. So Kansas this year in the 8 games, or I guess 9 games, right? 9 games that they've played without Darryn Peterson, they have an 87th percentile net rating this year. That is your O rating, how many points you're scoring per 100 possessions, subtracted by your D rating, how many points you're giving up per 100 possessions. 87th percentile in net rating. That's very good, right? Especially because that's unadjusted. And then when you take into account, if you have an 87th percentile net rating against one of the best schedules in the country, that where it becomes really impressive for KU. Well, in the games with Peterson, they're in the 88th percentile in net rating. So the fact that Kansas has been able to be this good even without Peterson, I think has been a pleasant surprise for KU, and does give me hope that, hypothetically, if you do miss Peterson for a longer period of time, if you did have to miss Peterson for, the rest of the season, theoretically, again, I'm just saying the worst case scenario, I'm not saying that's going to happen, then you would still have maybe more potential than maybe we gave this team credit for, right? And albeit 3 of those 4 games Peterson played were against Power 4 opponents, so it's going to be harder to accrue stats, necessarily in those. But I think the biggest thing you see drop, and this makes sense, is the offense for KU. The O rating for Kansas in the games with Darryn Peterson, I should clarify, the games with Darryn Peterson and the rest of them. So all 13 games this year, Kansas is in the 68th percentile in O rating. In the games they've played just without Darryn Peterson, so just the 9 games, they're in the 59th percentile. So that drops significantly. The effective field goal percentage goes from the 73rd percentile to the 63rd percentile. The 2-point percentage has actually been slightly better, as has the free throw percentage, but the biggest difference is the 3-point percentage, which makes sense with Peterson. In the 13 games this season, Kansas is shooting 35.6% from 3. But if we take out the 4 games that Peterson played in, Kansas would only be shooting 32.6% from 3. And that has led to one of the biggest differences in KU's offense. The other big thing that they've missed without Peterson is the turnover rate. So on the season, over the 13 games for KU, they have a 70th percentile turnover rate. So they've been solid at avoiding turnovers. But again, if we take out the 4 games that Peterson played, Kansas drops to the 43rd percentile, below average in turnover rate. Melvin Council's been really good at avoiding turnovers. I think the difference you see there is this. When you have Peterson, who is a good ball handler, with Council, who's a good ball handler, and now you have good harmony in terms of your ball handling and avoiding turnovers. When Peterson's out, you still have Council, but now your second ball handler becomes Marco Jackson, who struggled a bit with turnovers, or maybe it becomes, Jamari McDowell, who's more of a shooting guard. Maybe it becomes kind of a Jaden Dawson, who, again, more of a shooting guard, although he's avoided turnovers, but more limited minutes there. So, that's where you see the biggest improvement for KU when Peterson comes in. Avoiding turnovers, hitting threes. Those are both very big ways to make your offense more efficient. Interestingly enough, though, the defense has been better for KU in the games without Peterson. So on the season, for the full 13 games, Kansas is in the 95th percentile in D rating. But if we exclude those 4 games with Peterson, they're in the 98th percentile. So what gives there? Now, I do think the ceiling of this team is even better defensively with Peterson. He's a big guard, but I think a couple things are there. 1, the games with Peterson, Power 4 opponents. 2, part of the Peterson sample size was the North Carolina game, which the second half was your worst defensive half of the season. So that's counting into there. But it is interesting that you look at the defensive rebounding has been a little bit better. The steal and block rate, slight notches up. It's almost like KU understands that, hey, without Peterson, we have to win this game on the defensive end of the floor. And they're almost able to ramp it up just a smidge to be a little bit better on the defensive end. So I say all this to say, if you do miss Peterson for an extended period of time, do I think Kansas would win the Big 12 without him? No, I don't, with how good the conference is. But do I think they could finish with a winning record in the Big 12? Yeah, I still do think that. And do I think they could still, win a tournament game or 2 without Peterson? Yeah, I still do, because I really like this team and the way they're meshing together and the way they play Bill Self basketball in certain ways. It's just that Peterson is the difference of, do you want to win the Big 12? Do you want to make a Final Four? It feels like that's the difference of kind of getting you over the hump. So I have been very impressed with this Kansas team, even without Darryn Peterson, but I want to see more with Darryn Peterson. Let's get to a little KU football transfer frenzy going out of the program right now. This episode of the show is brought to you by Gametime. Hey, the World Cup's coming to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it is going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part, especially true for the World Cup. That's why the Gametime app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. You can also get KU basketball tickets over on Gametime. So we got the TCU game coming up. That's on January 6th, their next home game on Tuesday. What about the following Tuesday? That's a pretty big game, right? KU hosting Iowa State at 8 o'clock in Allen Fieldhouse against one of the best teams in the country so far in the Cyclones of Iowa State. Well, I'm looking right now. You can get the upper baseline, section 1, in row 26 for $70 over on Gametime, and you can see the seat view. You should know what Allen Fieldhouse seats look like, right? You're a KU fan, but maybe you're coming for the first time. You don't know what the seats look like. They're all great at Allen Fieldhouse. You can check those out over at Gametime. So download the Gametime app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Thanks again for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. Switching gears to a little bit of KU football. 3 new transfer portal entries for the Jayhawks. And I would say the biggest one here has got to be Harry Stewart, who, you know, I had been very high on Harry Stewart. 21 carries, 98 yards, a little over 4 yards per carry. He doesn't jump a ton off the page, but he was averaging 3 yards after contact per carry. That's higher than what Highshaw averaged last year. Now, albeit, you know, a lot of those numbers are in against lesser competition at the beginning of the season. But like, I liked Harry Stewart, and I thought that my thought process was add a really good transfer portal running back to be your 1A, and then make one of your young running backs, which to me, the lead in that category would be Harry Stewart, given that he was the third string this year. And in the games that Highshaw was out, he became the second string, that he would be the 1B. And then you would have the old phrase from Andy Kotelnicki was a pair and a spare. You have 2 top running backs. Your spare is kind of a guy who can come in late in games, is a guy if one of those guys are hurt, is a guy that, you know, if you just need a different look. I think the best version of that we saw was with Dylan McDuffie a couple years ago, and that could be one of your other young running backs too. Well, now you lose Stewart, and I think Stewart is somebody who, I don't know that I would quite put him in the same category as David McComb and John Kamara, but kind of a similar category. Players who potentially could have had a big role in 2026. At the very least, players that you feel like had potential to be something really good. Now, I do think it's another level of potential that I looked at it for Kamara and McComb also different because he's a quarterback, but still kind of in that same vein of you didn't want to lose Harry Stewart here, and I certainly didn't. I thought he was going to be in line to have a good season for KU here in 2026. And I think beyond that, you look at the running back room now. You have Justin Thurman, who's a young back. It seems like the staff is high on him, so maybe he just takes that role, right? And then you have Corey Mockery, who is one of my favorite players in this upcoming class, so that's good news for KU there. John Kelly redshirted. It does mean, though, that you just have 3 scholarship running backs in the class. So that means not only do you probably now need to add a portal stud at running back, you probably need to add another one to be kind of depth, whether it's an older player who can be, you know, a third string and you let one of the young guys be the 1B to the portal additions 1A, whether it's adding a young guy to kind of compete with the other young guys. It means you have more work to do at the running back position in terms of, you know, portal guys to kind of add. The question to me just becomes like, what level of portal additions do you make now? Do you add the stud in the portal and then have one of Thurman or a Mockery potentially as your 1B, and then the other is your spare? Or do you say, of our top 3 running backs, 2 are going to be portal additions and only one of the top 3 are going to be one of the youngsters? I think that'll be interesting how KU approaches that. So that one certainly hurts a little bit for KU. The other loss for Kansas was Aundre Gibson. Gibson, one of the corners on the roster. Now, KU does have a lot of returning corners. That's good news here. I guess, assuming, right? You never know with all these exits. Could be another one any minute now. But Jalen Todd, Austin Alexander, Saeed Gibbs, Jaleel Hurley feels like your top 4 right now on the depth chart. Maybe add somebody in the portal that pushes that around. But right now, that feels like a pretty clear top 4. Lenny Brown coming in as a freshman. Chris McCorkle, redshirted. Jacoby Davis is somebody who came in the class with Jameel Croft as a highly rated kid. Haven't really heard much about that there. The point being, this one kind of makes sense for, but also this one becomes interesting to me because something we talked about on the other day's episode, and thank you for the everydayers who already caught it with Jordan Peterson leaving. Jordan Peterson's the one that recruited Aundre Gibson from Desert Edge into Kansas. Does he just rejoin Peterson over at Kansas State. So he's in the portal. John Judd Kamara's in the portal. DJ Warner's in the portal. Former KU players who were recruited by Jordan Peterson to Kansas now in the portal. Are they going to wind up all Wildcats? That'll be interesting, or at least some of them. And then finally, the last one here is Caleb Redd. Redd came in as a transfer from Kentucky. He was a Missouri prospect who was seen as kind of a mid to high end 3-star recruit. Came to Kentucky, redshirted, transferred to Kansas. Wasn't able to make inroads on the 2-deep, and so he ends up leaving. And I think, okay, maybe that was something where, if Leroy Harris and Dak Brinkley come back, then he was going to be gone. KU's obviously recruited freshmen well at the defensive end spot, and with Harris and Bray and Brooks potentially back and Brinkley potentially back, I guess he goes to another spot. Now, what's interesting about all these, again, some of the, as far as Gibson and Redd, I don't think either one was projected on the 2-deep. I would say Stewart, to me, was projected on the 2-deep, but wait and see what happens with the rest of the offseason. KU's lost 16 guys now in the transfer portal. A lot of the 16 guys that KU has lost were guys that were not impacting the 2-deep for KU. Obviously, that's not true for everyone, and some of them are more future plays, but you can easily be like, well, how much actually on-field value has KU lost in totality, and can't they just find replacements in the transfer portal who, maybe if they don't help them as much in the long term, but maybe they can help them more right away in 2026. And the short answer is yes, but the long answer of why this does matter, even losing that many of players not on the 2-deep, is I would just imagine it's more expensive to replace a guy in the portal than to just have somebody come back. So for one, are you going to have enough money to fill as many holes as you have? Because you have a lot of spots you have to fill. Do you have enough money to do that? Maybe you do. But beyond that, you've lost 16 guys, and there's still 3 weeks left before the portal closes. So from 22 to 2025, KU lost an average of 16.8 players, but just 15 since 2023 is the average per 24/7 Sports. And several of those were walk-ons. So it's a lot of work to do in the portal for Lance Leipold, for Rob Ianello, and it does seem like you are losing more right now than you have in some past years, in some past classes. So it's not ring the alarm about these losses necessarily, but when you continue to stack these together, it becomes more of a longer hike for those guys to make in what this very important offseason is going to be for KU football. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you tomorrow for another edition of LOJ.